What is up, everybody, and welcome to our super spooky Halloween episode. I know, I forgot to dress up this year, but I'm almost certain that we'll see something scary in this inbox. So get comfortable, steal your kids' candy, and join me as we see how many tricks or treats were sent in this week. Alright, let's get right into it, and the first one sent in is from AndyZ. Andy, you mentioned in your email that sometimes you struggle with some basic stuff and you're wondering if it's just because you're using some kind of cheap Chinese machine. Well, that definitely could be a possibility, as we are only as good as our tools allow us. And it's hard to compare, especially if you haven't used some nicer quality machines. Before I get too far into critiquing your work, I will say, try another machine. It doesn't have to be anything too costly. Maybe grab a Bishop machine, as that is my favorite machine, and they're not overpriced. Now, as far as the tattoo goes, I do like this overall design, but I feel like it's lacking a bit, especially when it comes to the black shading. Now, obviously our eyes are drawn to the orange, and if you were to just have some black shading or even some brown, it would have absolutely made that thing pop a lot more than it does currently. And the birds themselves are coming off a bit cheap, especially the bird's legs, as it looks like a twig. And I would have liked to seen some varying shading happening inside of those birds just to give it some dimension. And right now you're just leaning a bit too hard when it comes to those separation lines with that white. You wouldn't really need that white if you had some varying shades. Now, going back to the question you had about the Chinese machine, as far as the line work goes, it seems like you're getting pretty decent results. Now, they're not perfect by any means, but they're definitely on their way to becoming solid lines. Now, as far as the saturation goes, that orange is a bit patchy, and the same could be said for that red sweater. But again, that could be going back to your machine. I just think for 4 years, you could be a bit further along in your career, and maybe this isn't your best work, as again, I do like the design, but maybe you just sent this in for our Halloween episode. I think your biggest focus should be using those black shades and making your designs more dynamic, because I think there's something there. When it comes to that red and orange, had you had that black shading, it would have just made this pop that much more, and in contrast with that black stipple shading in the back, it would have just been that much more impressive. But I do appreciate you sending that in, Andy, and thank you so much for letting me take a peek. Up next, we've got a tattoo sent in by Luckie, and Luckie, you sent in this Krusty the Clown tattoo holding a knife. Now, Luckie, as much as I love The Simpsons, there are a few noticeable mistakes that I'd like to bring up. The first one being, some of these lines don't really connect where they should. For instance, when we look at his eyes, his hand, and his forehead, you've got a couple of those lines that just don't connect. Another thing is, I can really tell where you ended your lines because you start to taper off right when you're coming out. And those we can see on almost every single line. As this thing heals up, those lines are going to fall apart a bit, and it's not going to look as clean as it currently does. Not that it looks super clean to begin with. Another thing I'd like to point out are those white points on the teeth. I feel like they're just unnecessarily there, and I think your white application could use some work, because those lines aren't really that strong, and they're in places that aren't adding much to the overall design. And when it comes to the shading in the eye, I just feel like you're really not taking your time, because those should be a lot smoother. In the right eye, you can see a definitive edge where you're trying to build that shade and give it some shape, but that should be a lot softer, and we shouldn't be seeing that edge. When it comes to the shade in the mouth, that shading is just all over the place. It's not even across the board, and that just shows me that you need to slow down and put in the time that it needs. Some nice line weights would have been good to see here as well. A nice thicker outline around the perimeter, and use those thin outlines on everything on the inside, like the detail in the gloves and minor details on the inside, like the tongue. Those fingers are stubby. This tattoo just kind of seems in the middle of the road for me, and there's definitely room for some improvement. Finish off those lines and add that shading where it belongs, and this thing would have been 10 times better. But thank you so much, Luckie, for sending that in. Alright, these next tattoos were sent in from Rachel out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the first one I want to look at is this little purple and black bat with a little green orb. As far as the execution goes, this thing is on point. These lines are crispy, nicely weighted, and that color saturation is just beautiful. And speaking of color, the colors that you chose for this tattoo just work so well with each other. I love these greens, I love these purples, and they just bounce off of each other very well. You did an exceptional job with the fur on this tattoo, and even though it's not a realistic tattoo, it just looks like fur. The black in this tattoo is right where it needs to be, and you've got all the highlights in the right places. And the party dots that you have in the middle of this tattoo, I noticed you also have in this other tattoo. I love all these little extra details that you have in this tattoo, like the transparency of the ghost. You changed the black outline to a green outline and added just a little bit of that green shading on the outside, making this ghost feel absolutely invisible. I think that's something that a lot of younger tattooers would just overlook. They would make that ghost white over the moon, and it wouldn't have that much character. And just like the other one, the line weights in this tattoo are money. I can't compliment you enough on your color saturation. This is just wall-to-wall, beautiful execution. You also sent in this other pumpkin tattoo, which again is just unbelievably well done. The pumpkin's got these little bumps on it, as well as these little dots in here, just giving it some nice texture. And the green glow that's coming from the inside of the pumpkin makes it feel like it's actually coming from one light source. It's not just randomly put everywhere. And again with the line weights, when we look at this top part of the Venus flytrap, you've got these very thin lines on the backside and these nice heavy line weights on the front, just giving it some nice depth. I also love these little cobwebs running throughout the tattoo. It just brings everything together. Even as something as simple as this tombstone you also sent in, you're just not shorting on details whatsoever. I think a lot of tattooers would have just made this thing look rather basic, using one single line weight to line the entire thing and not having near as much detail as yours. The green moss is just fantastic. And these little lines that are running through the mushrooms, again, are just adding a lot of detail with such a simple technique. But being a tattooer of only 5 years, it seems like you do a lot of Halloween tattoos. Seems like it's your thing, but keep it up. The work is fantastic, and thank you so much for sending these in. You know, there's nothing scarier than a bad healing tattoo. Will it stay? Will it go? Who knows? So prevent that with all the goodies that Mad Rabbit has to offer. Head on over to madrabbit.com and use code PONY20 to save 20% off of your entire order. And treat yourself. Alright, let's get back to the show. Alright, the next one sent in is from Dyllan with this Oogie Boogie tattoo from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Now this is what I'm talking about. I love this tattoo and all the colors that it has that you can tell are punched in properly. This one's not going anywhere. Notice all that black that's in this tattoo to really help those colors pop. Black is one of the most important things you can add to a tattoo to make it last longer. And not only last longer, but just give it that wow factor. When it comes to the composition of this tattoo, it's got a foreground, a midground, and a background. And with those dice being in front, nice and sharp and in focus, it keeps your eyes moving throughout the entire thing. And as we move back toward Oogie Boogie, you can tell that he's not as in focus as the dice, but he's still the centerpiece of this entire thing. And although I'm not the biggest fan of the execution of that blue line on Oogie Boogie's face, I do like that it feels like it's giving him a nice glow. Just really inserting him into that environment. If I had to complain about one thing, it would be the way that you ended this tattoo on the top and bottom. I wish it had a better shape. It's just a little too harsh on those edges for my personal taste. But other than that, great tattoo, and I appreciate you so much for sending that in. Alright, the next tattoo is sent in from Kaleb out of Mesa, Arizona. And Kaleb, you sent in this Leatherface tattoo that I think is pretty great. You captured some very nice shading in this tattoo, and it looks realistic. And of course, nice use of black. I do like the messiness of the hair, but it does come off a bit flat. Had you had some extra details in there, it would have made that hair look a lot more realistic. You paid great attention to the detail on the outside of the hair, but I do think some of that detail could have made its way into the midsection and around that forehead. And I do like how you softened the edges of this tattoo, pulling all the focus into the eyes and face. I do think you're lacking some details in the forehead, and again lacking some of those details in the hair, but this thing's really not bad, especially through some of the tattoos that we've seen today. So thank you, Kaleb, for sending that over, and keep up the good work. Alright, this next tattoo sent in is from somebody we featured on this channel before, so I'm not going to get too far into the critiques, but I did want to share with you guys because I think this tattoo is awesome. And this one is sent in by Deanna B out of New York, and she always does exceptional work. And she's only been tattooing for a few years, which is crazy. But I love everything about this tattoo, especially the little Art the Clown Terrifier tattoo at the bottom. All the little details in this thing just bring this thing to life. But Deanna, I do appreciate you taking the time to send this in, and again, if you guys aren't following her already, make sure you go check her out. Jeez man, why are all my friends sending in these tattoos? Well, this is sent in by an artist that you guys already may know. He did a video with me recently, and these tattoos are amazing. But all of his work is amazing. And I especially love these nurses. These things are just scary. And all these little details in the house, just a great work. Again, I'm not going to get too far into it, just make sure you go check them out. But thank you, Landon, for sending those in. And I miss you. But let's check out one more submission. This one was sent in by Thomas P. And Thomas, you sent in a picture of your arm with this jack-o'-lantern that you say is about 4 years old. I first thought this tattoo was about 20 years old because these colors are faded as you can just tell that these colors are surface level and not punched in how they should have been. That blue is almost transparent. In fact, you can see your skin through almost this entire tattoo. The only thing that appears to be punched in properly is that solid black. And I gotta say, I'm just not a fan of this design overall. Those tree roots look weird, that moon doesn't look very round, and that fence just seems out of place. This thing's just coming off as a bit amateur as it's lacking a lot of fundamentals. And I do see a pumpkin stem up here at the top, which makes me wonder if they forgot to add that color or if it just fell out. Either way, it could use it. I'd be curious to know how much you paid for this tattoo, as I hope it's not very much. This one's definitely a trick. To reiterate, this design just doesn't have a good flow, the colors are falling out all over the place, and if you would have said that this tattoo is 15 or more years old, I'd give you a bigger pass. But I can't. It's just a bit of a mess. But thank you so much, Thomas, for sending that in. Alright, boys and ghouls, that's going to wrap it up for the critiques this week. I want to thank everybody who sent in their work. I had a blast. But before we go, let's pick my favorite of the tattoos that were sent in this week. And that has to be Rachel out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, with this collection of spooky tattoos. I have absolutely nothing negative to say about these tattoos, as they are all so well executed. And these weren't the only ones you sent in, as you had an assortment of tattoos to pick from, and I just didn't know which one to pick, as they were all so good. Your attention to detail and your wall-to-wall saturation is something I think a lot of tattooers should strive for. So let's do something a bit different this week. Not only are you my favorite, but I want you to be my featured artist as well. So everybody please, go to her Instagram page, give her a follow, and let her know I sent you. But that's gonna be it, guys. Another successful Halloween in the books. But don't forget to subscribe while you're here, and remember, if you'd like to see your work critiqued on the series, you can do so by sending it to ponycritiques@gmail.com. Happy Halloween, everybody, and as always, I will see you guys next week.